Okay, so everyone remembers how shocked we all were when Trump won in 24, right?
Yeah, definitely. Huge upset.
Well, what if I told you there's a chance it wasn't just about U.S. politics?
Hmm, interesting. Tell me more.
Like, what if it was part of a much bigger trend? A global thing? Look at that today.
A global trend.
Okay, I'm all ears.
Yeah, we're going global today. We're diving into this Vox piece by Zach Beauchamp.
Oh, yeah, the one that came out right after the election?
That's the one. And he makes a pretty strong case that we need to look at the whole world to understand Trump's win.
That's a fascinating take. So where do we start with this global perspective?
Well, Beauchamp starts by looking at Kamala Harris and how she did in the election.
Okay, makes sense.
And, she consistently did worse than Biden did back in 2020.
Yeah, I remember seeing that in the results.
And it wasn't just like in a few places, it was pretty much everywhere, across demographics, across the country.
So, not just a couple of campaign missteps here and there.
Yeah.
Sounds more systemic. Yeah, exactly. Beauchamp argues that the usual stuff about messaging and strategy doesn't really explain it.
So it's got to be something bigger, right?
Right, something bigger going on.
And what does he think that bigger thing is?
Well, he says we need to look outside the U.S., like what else was happening in the world.
Interesting. Global context.
Exactly. He points out that 2024 was a huge year for elections all over the planet.
Oh, yeah, it was. Lots of countries went to the polls.
And when you look at the results, a really clear pattern pops up.
I'm intrigued. What kind of pattern?
Basically, incumbents were having a really rough time.
Losing elections, you mean?
Yeah, and not just in a few places. This was happening globally. Didn't matter what their ideology was.
Wow, okay. Give me some examples. Where were incumbents struggling?
Well, we saw it in the UK, Botswana, India, even North Macedonia.
Wow, that was a wide range of places.
And the list goes on too. South Korea, South Africa, Poland, Argentina, all saw their incumbents kicked out.
Sounds like a global anti-incumbent wave.
That's exactly what it looks like.
So even in places with pretty stable economies and all that, incumbents were still losing.
Seems that way. And Beauchamp says that the U.S. election fits right into this.
Makes sense given Trump's win.
Yeah, and remember those exit polls where something like over 70% of Americans said they were unhappy with the direction of the country?
Yeah, I remember that.
Well, that just shows you how much people wanted change.
Yeah, I could see how that would play right into Trump's hands. Even though he's a former president, he could still position himself as the change candidate.
Exactly. It's almost like just being the incumbent was a bad thing in 2024.
Yeah, like the label itself became toxic.
But the big question is, why? What's behind this global shift against incumbents?
Well, Beauchamp points to one possible culprit: global inflation.
Makes sense. Everything got so much more expensive.
Yeah, think about it. We had the pandemic, all those supply chain problems, prices went up, 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 and it's still affecting people.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And even though things have calmed down a little, we all remember what it was like before.
Exactly. And that memory sticks with people. They're frustrated. They want change.
Makes you wonder if maybe that's why everyone's so grumpy all the time.
Could be. But yeah, I mean, makes total sense to me. Inflation hits everyone's wallet.
But is inflation the only thing going on? Or could there be other factors feeding into this global trend?
That's the million-dollar question. And to be fair, Beauchamp admits we need more data, more research. But just looking at things from a global viewpoint gives us a whole new way to think about the 2024 U.S. election.
Like it wasn't just about American politics.
Right. It might be about something much bigger, a fundamental shift in how voters around the world are thinking. When you think about this global trend, it really makes you rethink all those post-election analyses we always see.
You mean the ones that focus on like specific campaign strategies and stuff?
Yeah, exactly. Like they get so caught up in, did they run the right ads or, make a gaffe or whatever.
But Beauchamp is saying that's not the whole story.
Yeah, he's basically saying those things might matter a little bit, but they can't explain the huge shifts we saw, like with Harris here in the U.S., but also globally.
So it's not just about like whether Harris had the right running mate or focused on the right topics in her campaign.
Exactly. Beauchamp says if it were just about messaging or, demographics, you'd expect her to do better than Biden in at least some areas.
Even if she did worse overall.
Right, exactly. But she didn't. It was like a consistent underperformance everywhere.
So that's why he says we need to look beyond the U.S. and think about this global anti-incumbent wave.
Yeah. It's like trying to explain a tsunami by talking about one little ripple in the water.
You got to look at the bigger picture.
Right, exactly.
Right.
So does that mean ideology doesn't matter anymore?
Yeah, that's a good question. Because it's easy to think, oh, this is just the right wing surging or whatever.
And sure, some right-wing challengers did win, but a lot of incumbent right-wing parties also had a tough time.
Right. Like you mentioned the UK, India, Poland.
Yeah, exactly. It wasn't just a left-wing thing or a right-wing thing. This trend seems to cut across all that.
So it's more like the ins versus the outs.
Yeah, it seems that way.
Yeah.
Like voters were just ready for something different. Anyone who promised change.
So if this anti-incumbent wave is as big as Bouchamp says, what does it mean for global politics going forward?
That's the big question, isn't it? It's still early to say, for sure, but there are some interesting possibilities.
Like, are we going to see even more instability? Are people just going to keep wanting change, even if it means, like, unpredictable leaders?
That's one possibility. It could also mean that people are just fed up with the status quo. They want more from their leaders.
More accountability, like actually addressing the issues.
Yeah, maybe. Maybe it's about competence. Like they want leaders who can actually handle all these crazy interconnected problems we're facing.
Who can actually lead and give us a way forward?
Could be a mix of all those things.
Hmm.
A desire for change, but also for better governance. For stability in a world that feels kind of out of control.
It definitely feels like we're at a turning point. It's not just about one election. It's a global shift. It does feel like we're at some kind of crossroads.
Yeah, like this is bigger than just one election in one country.
And it's important to remember this isn't something that just popped up out of nowhere. Like, Bouchant talks about how places like Poland and Argentina had already chosen new leaders before this year. So it's like this feeling of wanting change has been growing for a while.
Yeah, like a wave building up, and then 2024 was the year it crashed.
Exactly. And while Bouchamp focuses on inflation, I think we have to consider everything that's happened in the past few years, too.
We had a pandemic, right?
Mhm.
And the economy's been so shaky, plus all the political fighting, it just feels like it's been a lot.
For sure. And maybe this anti-incumbent wave is because of all that. Like,
Yeah.
deep down, people are just uneasy. They want things to be different.
So maybe it's not even about policies or the economy specifically, but more like people just want to feel stable again. They want leaders they can trust. That's a really good point.
Hmm.
Maybe what we're seeing is this global search for competence. Like people want leaders who can actually handle things and show us a way forward.
So where do we go from here? What happens if this keeps going?
That's the question Bootcamp leaves us with, and it's a big one. Does this mean people want radical change? Or are they just rejecting how things are now? And what if the new leaders don't deliver on what people want?
It's fascinating, right? But also kind of scary. Like, the whole world is holding its breath to see what happens next.
One thing's for sure, though. We can't just ignore what's happening globally. It's shaping our world, and we need to understand it if we want to face the future, whatever that future looks like.
So as you're thinking about everything going on in the world, remember to keep this global view in mind. What might seem like a one-off event could actually be part of something way bigger, something that's still unfolding. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.